And hello to the YouTubes. All right, let me share my screen in the Discord so everyone can know where exactly we're at, and then I'll get that on screen here. I haven't had enough caffeine today, so this is going to be a journey. Welcome. Hello. Thanks for joining us here at the Deleuze Guattari Quarantine Collective's ongoing reading of Anti-Oedipus part. I don't even know at this point. YouTube gave me a fucking notification for a playlist that it was at like 700 or 800 hours. It's just the AO readings. That's too much. That's too much. That's just too much. That's too much. Like, that's just too much, to say the least. We are going to be diving into more of 4.2. It is going to be a slower read than we normally do. For those of you who've been joining us a little bit here. Oh, I forgot to do the at everyone because the schedule got all fucked up. Oh, at everyone. AO reading starting now. This is going to be a journey. We have been slowly reading 4.2. Chapter 4 is complicated for about all of the reasons. It's where all of the ideas that they've been pushing on us and that they've been going through, that we've been talking about, everything they've been going through. It's finally the place where all these things start weaving together and they start telling us what we might be able to do or how we can add a sort of autocritique of such a thing. 4.1 focuses on sort of, I don't know, it focused on its own thing. 4.2 is very particular, and it is about going over the nature at the beginning. It's about understanding the split between the two regimes, where they talk about the molecular and molar, how they interoperate, how each one works. That's why we went through, now I think in the last 2 streams, and I'm going to do my best not to make it a 3rd stream, but we went through Daniel Smith's paper on the body without organs, where he describes at length the nature of organism versus machine, and the sort of deep held dichotomy that we have, and when I say we, I mean the pluralistic normative sense that that people have today, that there is a difference in that space and how this difference forms. How the difference forms is that on the machine, we tend to think of a machine as something that produces other things, not really itself. An organism produces itself. That there is an itself, that there is a singular, alone, an element, a soul, an embodiment, an organism, a totality that is a single thing versus a machine that is a collection of parts. And the difference between these two, how they come together, is a body without organs. Ultimately, as the chapter has been sort of talking through. So as we talk to the regimes of the desiring machines and that of the large sort of molar bodies and how they work, we're going to be getting through the space of the mechanism versus vitalism and how they've basically created a setup and an ontology that allows both to come together. This is how I've been understanding the piece. At any point, feel free, anyone who wants to, scream at me and tell me I am wrong. I'm very up for being told I'm wrong on this one. Very up for it. As anyone who's been enjoying this has already experienced, this is a beast of a section. And it's going to take us some time to get through. So we are going to do a little bit more on this part on Jacques Monod. I think we did actually read this already, but I did say we're going to be coming back to it. So don't be too shocked, I think, with what we end up doing with Jacques Monod and all of that. If anyone has a note, a question, anything before I get going, please, now would be the time, or forever hold your peace kind of thing. Nope. I'm down with this. I'm very down with this. Having some tea and waiting. All right, nothing. Means I'm going to start reading. I'm share my screen elsewhere. Share my screen on Discord. We're going to make our way through it. Desiring machines work according to regimes of syntheses that have no equivalent in the large aggregates. Jacques Monod has defined the originality of these syntheses from the standpoint of a molecular biology or a microscopic cybernetics without regard to the traditional opposition between mechanism and vitalism. Here, the fundamental traits of synthesis are the indifferent nature of the chemical signals, the indifference to the substrate, and the indirect character of the interactions. Such formulas as these are negative only in appearance and in relation to the laws of aggregates, but must be understood positively in terms of force, of puissance. Quote, between the substrate of an allosteric enzyme and the ligands prompting or inhibiting its activity, there exists no chemically necessary relationship of structure or of reactivity. An allosteric protein should be seen as a specialized product of molecular engineering, enabling an interaction, positive or negative, to come about between compounds without chemical affinity, and thereby eventually subordinating any reaction to the intervention of compounds that are chemically foreign and indifferent to this reaction. The way in which allosteric interactions work hence permits a complete freedom in the choice of controls, and these controls, having no chemical requirements to answer to, will be the more responsive to physiological requirements, will accordingly be selected for the extent to which they confer heightened coherence and efficiency upon the cell or organism. In a word, the very gratuitousness of these systems, giving molecular evolution a practically limitless field for exploration and experiment, enabled it to elaborate the huge network of cybernetic interconnections. I know it's a lot, isn't it? Isn't it just an extraordinary amount? Last week we went over all of these elements of the allosteric enzymes and how they operate. We are not doing that this week, but I'm going to try to top line it. Feel free to tell me at any point if I'm wrong. But at the basic point, the way he's going over here and utilizing Jacques Monod for, who did a huge amount of work in how these things come together and how to consider them. He, again, he and Rouillet are basically how to put it? I want to say they're the daddies of this. Like they owe, D&G owe a great deal to them, that they only lightly touch into both of them in this section, and it's significantly more important. Significantly more important. The way that allosteric enzymes, yeah, it's their introduction to cybernetics, effectively. But the idea of this allosteric enzyme and how it operates, and the way that these things sort of work, is less that there is a direct linear causal reaction of, oh, we get one thing, then another, then another, then another, and it's this chain of events that always does this thing. But instead that the way that these enzymes operate and the way that the elements inside of these cellular interactions work is that you have these chains of elements that go sort of, that kind of have whatever's around, the substrate or some other chemical or anything else is inserted, and either sort of has a positive inference loop within itself where it produces a thing that blocks itself, produces a thing that encourages, or produces a thing that just kind of moves on. The enzyme itself the allosteric enzyme doesn't really give a shit about kind of what it's supposed to do. There isn't really a supposed to, I think would be the way I would probably phrase it. There isn't a supposed to, there isn't a chemical necessity. He says, I think nicely here, there's no chemically necessary relationship of structure or reactivity inside of the way that these cells work. These cells, as they work, don't really have a chemical thing to answer to. They operate, you could say, in a bubble. They kind of operate in a bubble, but they operate in a bubble that constantly is having stuff added into it that's changing how that bubble works. And so the way that these things happen is there's kind of a anything goes, and everything sort of has some level of positive to extreme positive, or minor negative to extreme negative, or kind of middle of the road. And there's kind of a almost self-regulating process to it that, again, we see only after the fact, but in the cell, there's no rationality for it. And this is kind of what they get at when they talk about this thing at the bottom here. With the globular protein we already have at the molecular level, a veritable machine. He's saying the globular protein that exists is effectively a machine. It's a machine in functional properties, but not in fundamental structure. Nothing but the play of blind combinations can be discerned. Randomness caught on the wing, preserved, reproduced by the machinery of invariance, and thus converted into order, rule, and necessity. Swarm Machine had to mute you, sorry. It was really loud. Say hi in chat if you want to actually talk. And as Bat says, the understanding machine seems highly inspired by him and Rouillet. Yeah, it's we have had a Rouillet reading on our server for some time, and it genuinely kind of blew my mind because I had come to Rouillet. I mean, he's known, but he's not known. He's not like a Deleuze who's known in critical theory. He's one of those like secondhand sort of people, which sounds terrible after now that I've read him and I realize he really should be, he's really significantly important. But it's, as Bat says, it's a nuanced understanding of machines compared to earlier cybernetic theorists. It's stepping away from, and again, when we talk about people even today talking about cybernetics, they go with this very hard line view of what machine is. But Rouillet and these guys who really are cybernetic theory and play with that, start moving away from this idea of like vitalism versus mechanism, that, oh, there's something special about vitalism, or that mechanism doesn't have that or has something else. And instead, it's really kind of all mashed together, that we can find machines in the organisms as he's going through here. It's been pretty incredible. It's my favorite thing that we have that recording because I can't join it every week. It's early for me. Plus, Jesus Christ, there's not enough hours in the day. So we have that. Go listen, because the explanations are exceptional. We have people way smarter than we should be reading that shit on our server. Thank God. Thank God. But this is the play that they're making. They're talking about breaking down, as we understand, the idea of machine versus organism. And within the organism, you're like, look, we just don't see it as machine because we talk about the thing after the fact. We don't really talk through the machinery of it. We talk about it as, oh, it's machines. These machines produce other things. They don't really produce itself. That's what machines do. Organisms are collections of machines. Not really. We kind of fuck it up. And so this idea of organization that organisms have, which is why we use the term very often, this setup is what they're starting to go into. I wanted to quickly get through that first paragraph. Is there any, I know there's going to be questions. If you haven't or weren't with us last week, do go back and re-listen to us really painfully spend literally 2 hours on the one paragraph. Like we did 2 hours on the one paragraph. We went back through, just a huge amount of Minod's writings. I actually found a few of them, and then we went through, again, the writings of, Jesus Christ, my brain. The Body Without Organs paper by Daniel Smith. I'm getting the caffeine into me. It's the way it works. But last week was long. And we also went into this next paragraph, but this is where I actually want to, again, start spending time. Generally, do we all get the gist of the last one? Generally? There's a button you can do thumbs up emojis in the Discord as well. Just yeah, would be good. Or not, also. Okay. There we go. Express silence if you agree that everything is going wonderfully. Beautiful. To continue. How, starting from this domain of chance or real inorganization, large configurations are organized that necessarily reproduce a structure under the action of DNA and its segments, the genes, performing veritable lottery drawings, creating switching points as lines of selection or evolution. This, indeed, is what all the stages of the passage from the molecular to the molar demonstrate, such as the passage appears in the organic machines, but no less so in the social machines with other laws and other figures. In this sense, it was possible to insist on a common characteristic of human cultures and of living species, as Markov chains, aleatory phenomena that are partially dependent. In the genetic code, as in the social codes, what is termed a signifying chain is more a jargon than a language, composed of non-signifying elements that have a meaning or an effect of signification only in large aggregates that they constitute through a linked drawing of elements, a partial dependence, and a superposition of relays. It is not a matter of biologizing human history, nor of anthropologizing natural history. It is a matter of showing the common participation of the social machines and the organic machines in the desiring machines. At man's most basic stratum, the id, the schizophrenic cell, the schizomolecules, their chains and their jargons. There's a whole biology of schizophrenia. Molecular biology is itself schizophrenic, as is microphysics. But inversely, schizophrenia, the theory of schizophrenia, is biological, biocultural, inasmuch as it examines the machinic connections of a molecular order, their distribution into maps of intensity on the giant molecule of the body without organs, and the statistical accumulations that form and select the large aggregates. Again, another paragraph we spent a lot of time on last week, but I do think it's worth going through a little bit piece by piece because we're going into Zandi in the next paragraph, and it's kind of a upfront thing that's important that we front load a couple of pretty big ideas. That's cool. So if you haven't read Susan Oyama's Evolution's I or The Ontogeny of Information, which is where I get most of my understanding of a lot of this stuff from, I recommend them. If you have backgrounds in this stuff, or they teach it better wherever you fucking went to school than where I did, good for you. We often think and are told, especially in the weird capitalist system we sort of live in today, that DNA is set, that a person's DNA is essentially who they are. But there's only kind of truth there. DNA affects drastically, obviously, a good deal of things. But environment, the stuff that actually is made into you, the stuff that you, like you are what you eat kind of mentality, but what DNA does at the very basic levels, that's what we were just talking about. At the molecular, the singular, the tiniest little bit of how these little things come together. And so when we talk about DNA, we tend to think of them as adenine, cytosine, guanine, like these very, very specific things and very specific letters even in DNA sequences. And that's what makes up our DNA, and our DNA just stretches out and that's us. It's only sort of true. DNA, as they were discussing, is utilizing the substrate, the material, the stuff that it's given in order to produce further bits, accelerate, shrink. It doesn't have a blueprint for like Brooks's beard or the thinning on my forehead, or any of these things. That's not really what it is. It's the little bits that's using the material of the world in order to generate. And that material of the world also has a randomness to it. So when we talk about the way that these large configurations that are organized necessarily reproduce a structure under the action of DNA segments, they're going through the molar to the molecular of biology. And they talk about this. The stages of passage from molecular to the molar demonstrate. The passage appears in the organic machines, but no less so in social machines. Any machines, any of these little bits that we start talking about as they start putting us together, we've totalized Brooks. We've said, oh, this DNA yielded him. We see this line from that to this, to this, to this, causal, all the way through. But the reality is, it's a lot more complicated. The way that these proteins are formed inside of these enzymes and how the enzymes interact, they're very much more than just literally always producing that one thing. This is how you end up with miscolorings, birthmarks, cancer, for example, deformity, whatever it may be. DNA isn't the end-all be-all. It's the stuff that is using other stuff. And these things together at the tiniest bits are producing. And out some way, we kind of come up with this organism, this whole thing, this totality. And so when we talk about this language of DNA or the language of things at the base, it's one of my favorite bits. It's I'm with you on this one. How they're talking about meaning and signifying chains here is really, really specific. In the genetic code, as in social codes, what is termed a signifying chain is more a jargon than a language, composed of non-signifying elements that have a meaning or an effect of signification only in large aggregates that they constitute through a linked drawing of elements, a partial dependence, and a superposition of relays. This is the fucking important part of the sentence. This entire paragraph. This thing right here. And again, when we talk about genetic codes, social codes, they're equating them. They're saying this is how these things operate, and you can start seeing these things even socially, even in your personality and how you deal with people. But let's talk about it, genetic codes. What is termed a signifying chain? These letters in your DNA mean you're going to have this. It's more a jargon than a language. It isn't really a language in the sense of what we generally would consider to be sort of master signifier with a complete determinate end that goes all the way through. This is how we talk about language. This is Lacan's version of language. It's also theirs, how we talk about speaking and signification and denotation and manifestation, all these elements that make up a proposition. It's not really that. We're talking about jargon, right? Non-signifying elements. That's what jargon is. Jargon is things that are themselves sort of non-signifying, but they mean something within a very particular context. Generally speaking, jargon. But they say all of this stuff, we term it a signifying chain, but it's more jargon than language. It's made of non-signifying elements that have a meaning or an effect of signification only in large aggregates. Only in the large totality does that bit of DNA mean this part of, does it mean blue-eyed, for example. It wouldn't mean blue-eyed if it was just the single DNA protein, I don't know, ACG, whatever combination. It doesn't mean anything. It doesn't mean anything because it's just that little enzyme, acid, protein, whatever the fuck thing on the floor. But hey, here it is. It's blue-eyed Brooks. And look at that. It's only in these large aggregates do you actually have signification that starts to show up. And it constitutes it through a linked drawing of elements, a partial dependence, and a superposition of relays. The blue eye only exists in the context of location, where it's at, how it's set up, the type of thing that it is, and like all of this shit thrown together. All this shit thrown together. This is kind of the necessity of it. And it's not about, they're not trying to go and biologize human history or anthropologize natural history. They're saying that you need to understand it's a matter of showing the common participation of social machines and organic machines, both of those, inside of desiring machines. Desiring production is not separate from biology, but it isn't only biology. Desiring production is not separate from historical reality, but it's not only that. It's all of these things. It's all of these things. It's all of it together. That's what they're saying. Desiring machines is their, I don't want to say synthesis, but it's not far from that. This is their understanding of the baseline of this is where these things emerge from, is desiring production and desiring machines. This is what they're starting with. Red says, oh, he crossed it out as I was about to read it. You need more time to think it through? Feel free. What's up, Noah?
Brooks, this is actually a really interesting point for me to jump in, actually, because this is a little bit where I'm dealing with in 1.5. In 1.5, that's where they're kind of talking about a summary of the three syntheses.
Oh, and also it might be related to the purloined letter as written and explained and talked about by Edgar Allan Poe and Lacan, which a reading you just finished up, which is all over our YouTube if anyone were to look at it. Shameless plug. Please continue.
Yeah, thank you so much. It was a great discussion. But it's really interesting because in this section in 1.5, they do a summary of the three syntheses, and specifically when they talk about the disjunctive synthesis, they are mentioning all of this here: the signifying chain, the Markov chain, for example. But it's a little interesting to me because what stood out with a little bit of what you said, it's almost random, but it's not completely random. At least in terms of like the flow of desire. They give an example of like a train shunting, like a train is going on a track or on a path, and then a lever's pulled, and then it goes, it diverts, its path, and it continues. And when you look at something like a Markov chain, for example, the event that happens is predicated from a previous state. So in a way, I think that this is where they're getting to how the disjunctive synthesis produces the organism, because, they are talking about these, the flow of desire and their current state being predicated from, previous states, and kind of drawing a little bit of a linkage between an internal code and an exterior milieu. Sorry. But I wanted to put this quote in the chat, Brooks, if you want to read it. But instead of saying outside world, the French is actually exterior milieu, because the translators got it wrong. And I think this is a little bit about what we're talking about.
The recordings and transmissions that have come from the internal codes, from the exterior milieu. Yeah, I mean, outside world, it's one of those things because world is so singular. Like, why would you say milieu is world? This is why we're doing the translation. Sorry. From one region to another, an organism all intersect following endlessly ramified paths of great disjunctive synthesis. Yes. Yeah, I know. Translation's fun, isn't it? No? I don't know. Sorry. Thought you were going to say more.
Oh, I was just thinking it was interesting regarding the kind of organism that we're discussing here, and how the disjunctive synthesis and the recordings.
Well, they're going to be getting directly to that. I'm trying to avoid yet talking directly about the syntheses, but it is, when we talk about the element of the randomness that's sitting there. This is a thing that in all of Deleuze's works, he talks about it from Logic of Sense on, difference and repetition. He's deep on it. Nietzsche too, like they refer, and they have conversations. I think we're going to be coming up on their discussion on Brownian motion in here even, which they refer to. But it's, again, for them, this specific section, as we start talking about the disjunctive, is as we start forming and saying that there is a totality, there is an organism, or there is this thing. The nature of how we get to that and how it's produced is desiring production. They're wanting to make sure that we realize they don't want us to separate all of these things out. They don't want us to separate machine from organism, or the vitalistic sort of from the purely machinic. Instead what they're doing is they're talking about how the machinic actually produces the organism, and how the organism comes of the collectivity, or the regime of large numbers of the machinic. And so this back and forth is, again, about the singular totality, the one all, the whatever you want to phrase it as. And that's what they're getting to. That the disjunctive is that step. Ultimately, it's one of the steps of the syntheses as we move from the molecular to the molar. And this is the process of that. It's an important step. A lot of people, when I say a lot of people, I mean a lot of people, even people who read, and you'll see this, even people who read D&G get very into the vitalism of it, which is fine. Everyone's got their thing, or the machinic nature of everything. And they're like, yeah, but still, this is almost that same dichotomy of talking about man versus nature. It's the same type of thing. The inorganic versus organic, whatever it may be. The machinic versus the vital is, again, that same dichotomy, man versus God, whatever you want. But it's a dichotomy that needs to be dealt with. And they deal with it by effectively it's the body without organs, which is the disjunctive. That's how we move from the machinic to the organism, as Daniel Smith sort of goes over. So that setup, they're unifying all of it, to be very frank, which is pretty amazing. But that's why these paragraphs are pretty important. Noah says, the disjunctive synthesis facilitates the intersection of internal codes and exterior milieus. Always being reborn gets rid of that dichotomy, always living and dying simultaneously in a way. We're going to get to that. Don't worry. We're not quite at that section. But yeah, again, as I've said before, I side with Holland's take that we are starting to talk about and think about a permanent revolution, that there is no revolution to a specific new milieu, but instead that it is the embracing of that revolution. But hey, we'll get there. Let's see. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, so no, just the last sentence of this paragraph, I think, touches into what you're saying, because it's about the disjunctive. Schizophrenia is biological biocultural inasmuch as it examines the machinic connections of a molecular order, their distribution into maps of intensity on the giant molecule of the body without organs, and the statistical accumulations that form and select the large aggregates. It's basically a nice description of how the BWO and the disjunctive function, more or less. Good? Everyone good? Pardon me. All right. To continue, we're going to get into Leopold Zondi. Zondi is a unique character. We're going to get into Zondi in a very particular way. Zondi began to play with and work with, although his theories were a little, well, I'll just say out there a bit. But when we talk about how parents and children have same personalities, what do we mean? Do we start talking about how parents genetically are predetermined to that personality trait and therefore the child is also just the same genetics and that's it? Or that it's purely a sort of spirit and the vitality of the parent that is transferred into the child? Or is it both? Because they're the same thing. Zondi played with that. He would do this weird shit. He had one experiment that he would have people, he would have had a bunch of photos of people who were seriously mentally ill, and he would ask people to describe them and talk about them and choose out of them the ones they liked. I think it was ones they liked. Not sure if it was ones they liked or hated. And from this, he would use that to diagnose their interior conditions. He was an interesting cat. But we'll continue with this. Zondi set out on this molecular path, discovering a genic, it's not genie. Anytime you see genie in this text, it's because it's a fucking shitty PDF, and it was a shitty PDF with shitty OCR. Zondi set out on this molecular path, discovering a genic unconscious that he contrasted with the Freudian individual unconscious, as well as Jung's collective unconscious. He often calls this genic, or genealogical unconscious, familial. And Zondi himself went on to study schizophrenia using familial aggregates as his units of measure. But the genic unconscious is familial only to a very small degree, much less so than Freud's unconscious, since the diagnosis is carried out by comparing desire to the photographs of hermaphrodites, assassins, etc., instead of reducing it, as usual, to the images of daddy-mommy. Finally, some reaction to the outside. A whole alphabet, an entire axiomatic done with photos of mad people. This has to be tried. Testing. The need for paternal feeling against a series of portraits of assassins. It's no use saying that this remains within the bounds of Oedipus. The truth is that it throws them open in a remarkable way. The hereditary genes of drives therefore play the role of simple stimuli that enter into variable combinations following vectors that survey the entire social field, an analysis of destiny. Destiny is a very particular word here. We're going to get into that. I mentioned this experiment. I didn't pre-read this. I just need to remember that I only know things that are in this book, and my brain doesn't allow me to remember other information. Eventually I'll read a second book. The line in here that I want to take a second on is the finally some relation to the outside. Generally, when you go to a psychiatrist, counselor, tell me about your relationship with your father. is where they start. It's even a joke in Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure. It's what he starts with, Freud, every fucking time. It's always that. But as they've said, and they open with, a schizophrenic out on a stroll is a better example than a neurotic on a couch. What they mean by that is what they're implying here as well, that by starting with daddy mommy, by pushing everything into this tight package during psychoanalytic sort of times, you're forcing everything into those holes. And instead here, Zondi's like, he would show all kinds of fucking wild shit. People who were in asylums. He did show hermaphrodites, I believe naked. Assassins. I'm not sure assassins is the right word here. I want to say famous killers. I'm not sure if it's assassins. There's anyway, but these were like social things. These are, most people don't have, for example, hermaphrodite in the house. It's these are things in the world, and how people would react to them. He would kind of use this to diagnose them, how people react to the world, how people see all of this stuff. LJ forcing all those things into the hole is never something I would expect to hear here. Of all the places, pretty sure that's a sentence that has absolutely been said before here. Not in this context, maybe even. But the idea of pushing everything into daddy mommy versus allowing those connections to the outside, that's the thing, is a whole alphabet, an entire axiomatic done with photos of mad people, testing the need for paternal feeling against a series of assassins. This is different. This allows this sort of external to the family sort of conversation to begin, where the person is engaging socially. This is what Zondi really pushed, and what he pushed specifically with the schizophrenics. And again, at this time, this means autism at large, generally. Most of the time, this does not mean people who sit and talk to themselves. There's people who have see themselves as another person, people who can't talk very well, people who are automatistic, automated movements and do things. All of this applies here. And by asking these questions, showing images of all of this stuff and the social connections of it, that thing is what he's playing with. It doesn't help that Brooks is reading it as assassins. Wait, what is it? It says assassins. God damn it, Rudd. Assin? Oh, see? Okay, you were doing the pun. Very nice. Very nice. Very nice. Very nice. I'll allow it. That's okay. I'll allow it. You get what I'm talking about here, though, or what they're saying? That they're, instead of sort of pretending like there is this organism or this organization around the family, instead starting with the molecular, starting with the social molecular, starting with the social machines, desiring machines, giving other places for things to connect, talking about all those to see maybe they have their origins elsewhere, how they're connected elsewhere, how they're playing elsewhere, how they work with it. All of these things. This is more what they're playing with. Right? All right. Good. It's to talk a little bit about the test, and why they're sort of focusing on it, is it was in, as they said, in relation to Freud and in relation to, Jordan Peterson's hero, Red Book guy, Jung. Jung believed there is a singular total unconscious. Freud believed we each had an individual unconscious. And in between that, there's a lot more interesting things. And Zondi played with that you are a unique subjectivity that's experienced a socially produced unconscious, or an unconscious that is collectively, in some capacity, separated off from other things in your unique configuration. And this test was his sort of play of that. The use of destiny here. And it's worth taking a second because again, I'm actually gonna open up the PDF. Sorry, I know this is that thing I can't help but doing. I just want to see if because the answer is going to be that they always fucking get this wrong. But I'm going to go look for Zondi. Come on, where are you? Oh, so week. This would be, wait, is that? Yeah, I think that's later. This is about his, yeah, here it is. Let's see. Because Zondi didn't use the word destiny. I mean, he wouldn't have. He was fucking, I want to say he's German. And so I'm pretty sure he has a completely different word for it. But his wording tended to be towards fate as a thing. And Deleuze plays with destiny and fate in some very interesting ways in Logic of Sense. The reason this is important is the way that we are, for Zondi, Deleuze is going to be taking this, so that's why it's important. It's an analysis of destiny. How we're pulled and pushed in the world, drives and desires. Remember, desire is not mine. I want a car. That's fine. That's not what we're talking about here. There's a push there, but saying it isn't really the desire. There's an attraction and a repulsion that's happening towards these very, a multitude of things that is ultimately surfacing as a car. The desire to get pizza with a friend. It's not that necessarily you wanted pizza with a friend, but you're attracted in these general directions, and there's a bunch of attractions and repulsions. And for Zondi, this attraction and repulsion thing is kind of the underlying thing that puts us in the position we're in with the people that we are around. We're attracted to other people who have similar attractions or attractions that work with ours, sort of systems that work with ours. You could say their machinery works with our machinery kind of thing. And so as we are raised, as we do this with parents, as parents raise us, for Zondi, they kind of build into us attraction and repulsion in a bunch of different, very particular ways. And so for him, the reason that he would show people these things and the reason he would play into these things and sort of push them is that it would be like, hey, are you attracted or repulsed by this? Are you attracted or repulsed by this? And through that, he would begin to understand exactly what's making you as a thing interesting to people. If that makes sense to everyone. That's kind of the big underlying thing that's happening here. And so as he's doing this, it's, again, there's a lot of stuff that he did that sort of plays with it, but for him, it's playing with this attraction and repulsion. So when Deleuze ends that with saying, the hereditary genes of drives therefore play the role in a simple stimuli that enter into variable combinations following vectors that survey an entire social historical field. An analysis of destiny. No, not that destiny. Kind of. Talk about drives and repulsions and all that shit. You can start talking about, this is how Zondi talked about it. But again, social machines, desiring machines producing repulsions or attractions. That's how they've used the language from the start. That's the big deal here, right? So, how is Jordan Peterson involved? I have to make a Jordan Peterson joke anytime I can because he's funny to me. And he wrote actually a decent book on Jung and used to actually give interesting talks on Jung. I used to be a little more into Jung than I am now. But now he's insane. So, got to make the jokes. Sorry, LJ. To continue. In point of fact, the truly molecular unconscious cannot confine itself to genes as its units of reproduction. These units are still expressive and lead to molar formations. Molecular biology teaches us that it is only the DNA that is reproduced, not the proteins. Proteins are both products and units of production. They are what constitutes the unconscious as a cycle, or as the autoproduction of the unconscious, the ultimate molecular elements in the arrangement of the desiring machines and the syntheses of desire. We have seen that through reproduction and its objects, defined familially or genetically, it is always the unconscious that produces itself in a cyclical orphan movement, a cycle of destiny where it always remains a subject. It is precisely on this point that the statutory independence of sexuality with regard to generation rests. Zondi senses this direction, according to which one must go beyond the molar to the molecular, so acutely that he takes exception to all statistical interpretations of what is wrongly called his test. What is more, he calls for going beyond contents to the realm of functions. But he makes this advance, he follows this direction only by going from aggregates or classes toward categories, of which he establishes a systematically closed list, categories that are still only expressive forms of existence that a subject is meant to choose and combine freely. For this reason, Zondi misses the internal or molecular elements of desire, the nature of their machinic choices, arrangements, and combinations. He also misses the real question of schizoanalysis. What drives your own desiring machines? What is their functioning? What are the syntheses into which they enter and operate? What use do you make of them in all the transitions that extend from the molecular to the molar and inversely, and that constitute the cycle whereby the unconscious, remaining a subject, produces and reproduces itself? There's a lot said in this paragraph. Pretty solid paragraph. Let's open with the beginning. We'll just kind of make our way through step by step, unless anyone has a particular question overall. But we're getting to, ultimately, functions and moving a little bit beyond where Zondi went. They're making a little bit of a critique of Zondi here, but they're saying this is the right decision, the right choice, the right attraction, you might say. The beginning. In point of fact, the truly molecular unconscious cannot confine itself to genes as its unit of reproduction. Those units are still expressive and lead to molar formations. When we think about genes and we think about their setup, they are necessarily related to, like, genetically. You go all the way back to, like, the peas in a pod and how you have yellow or green and how there's dominant or any other trait. Genes are units of reproduction, but they're expressive necessarily. That's how we see them. They lead to molar formations. They're actually derived from molar formations. So they start from the big object and we sort of walk them backwards, right? Molecular biology teaches us it is only the DNA that is reproduced, not really the proteins. Proteins themselves aren't really reproduced. They're produced, but not reproduced. So the protein that produces DNA, right? It's something can't reproduce itself in this space is kind of how they've been talking and what we've been talking about. So as such, proteins become the products and units of production. They're what constitutes the unconscious as a cycle or the auto-production of the unconscious. This is the ultimate molecular elements in an arrangement of the desiring machines and the syntheses of desire. This is the process as they're talking about it, and they're not minorly equating. Again, for them, biological processes aren't separate from this. Desiring production is all of these things, to talk about all of these things. LJ took a class in non-Mendelian genetics, and yeah, the DNAs create little viruses all the time with both DNA and proteins as components. The DNA creates the viruses which create the things, right? Or it's the component, the virus has those things as its components, but it's not directly the same one-to-one. Am I wrong on that? Someone smarter than me?
I'm not sure exactly what you mean, but it's basically the DNA creates these jumping elements that disturbs itself.
Right. But DNA doesn't, how to put it, the phrasing that they use here is going to be important. Let's actually because I have the French open, so let's just actually just steal it directly. Two seconds, sorry. Boop, 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 boop. Let's see. They're going over it here, saying this is the DNA that is reproduced. Proteins are both produced units and units of production. They constitute the unconscious as a cycle of self-production, auto-production, as they say, of the unconscious, the ultimate elements of the molecular elements in the arrangement of desiring machines and the syntheses of desire. Let's see, this is fantastic. How do I put this in the stupid fucking YouTube now? That's fine. Well,
it's okay. I only mentioned that because there's some parallel here. I'm just saying that
it's a parallel. Yeah, very much. I get it.
I'm just saying that the DNAs are not like these codes that's sitting on a throne and immune to itself. It has its internal limits, and when they create these random elements, they push for these internal limits as well.
Someone on YouTube, I think, writes it really nicely, and thank you, LJ, by the way, as well. K. Demise, DNA is a sequence of proteins that in itself has a code on how to reproduce itself. Protein is merely the coding block that doesn't have a way to reproduce itself coded into itself. That is exactly the right way to phrase it.
It's almost it's a holder. It's a holder and then it's a executor, but it's the same thing. These jumping elements actually are made of both, so it makes a lot of sense from that way. Yeah.
And Wig, don't go beyond it. We're talking about this. Those other things, it still applies, I think, generally. We can have that discussion another time. We're getting through the paragraph. That's exactly, I think, the way to phrase what's going on in this paragraph and how they're talking about it, because it's, again, going beyond content to the realm of functions. And this move, this advance, his issue is he goes from classes to categories, and he builds a closed list, categories that are still expressive forms of existence the subject is meant to choose and combine freely. Zondi's list of things, which was like generally psychosexual in nature, it was like, oh, here's the 20 categories of people, and look at these pictures, and oh, you're in this category. Kind of defeating the purpose, but it's the right direction. That's what they're going at. It's the right direction. This is the right play because we're moving away from content to function, and understanding sort of this play, because again, desire machines don't have content, function. And now my YouTube chat is having what I consider to be the best YouTube chat I've ever seen, because it's a really good back and forth. DNA is actually nucleotides, the vast network of regulatory proteins, RNA, and other DNA, but the essential point stands. I like that this is my YouTube chat. This makes me happy. This is my Discord. This is good shit. I like all you people. This makes me just glad. There are a lot of people to correct me. It's nice and say things smarter than I do. It helps me sound very smart. This is the underlying thing. So the real question of schizoanalysis, of all of this, because again, they're saying the direction Zondi's going is right. It doesn't go far enough. It's not deep enough. Instead, let's talk about what drives your own desire machines. What is their functioning? What are the syntheses into which they enter and operate? What use do you make of them in all the transitions that extend from the molecular to the molar and inversely from the molar back to the molecular, and that constitute the cycle whereby the unconscious, remaining a subject, produces and reproduces itself? The nature of the organism versus the machine. And this is where we start making the move into, as we understand it, and as we're talking here, into finally libido and desiring machines. finally making that transition all the way down as we make our way through biology, because now we're at the place of function, where these things are, how they work together, what do they do, what are the processes and syntheses they take part in, how do they fall back on themselves, what are their interactions, all of these elements. So, we will continue. Unless anyone has a last note or question. I always give everyone a moment. Okay. Prions are fascinating. My understanding of prions is that they don't reproduce proteins, but instead that their shape causes other proteins to become misshapen. I might be wrong on that, but my understanding is they don't actually produce. They're more like a fucky thing that hits a thing and the other thing becomes fucky too, which is scientific terminology if you're unfamiliar.
You're mostly correct, Brooks. However, there's
spoken like a professor even too, I know.
There's this thing called viroid, and there's also giant virus that's been discovered recently. I think you might find it interesting, but it's not exactly related to this part of the. They're kind of loose below virus level that can still reproduce itself, and there's a virus that reproduces itself inside of other viruses while it's living inside of a host cell. So there's derivatives of different virus sequences.
And yes, modest warfare, I think, is spot on. The scientific term for prion is fucking terrifying. That's also, I think, scientifically the term for it. Yeah. Really fascinating shit. Really fascinating shit, and absolutely terrifying. And one of the many ways that the world is probably destroying itself and humanity is ending itself. We have a lot of those, though, so throw it into the basket of apocalyptic nightmares. I live in a country that just decided they're going to pass bills to get rid of the Department of Education. So, because who fucking needs that? I love it. Yes, to continue. Fuck, sorry, it's been a long fucking 2 weeks being an American. It's a lot. It's been a lot being an American. So, now we're finally at desiring machines. And again, they're not speaking allegorically. They're talking about the way that our understanding of all of these biological or even social systems need to be understood all at once, all coming together, how the machinery of the tiny bits that are purely function become something else, that become content that we add to them and become grouped into large objects and become organisms. This thing that's at play here is the big deal. And this, one of the, again, issues, I think, with a lot of what we're talking about is, as we talk about moving from the mechanistic to the, vitalistic, one of the other parts of that, and I'm saying it very wrongly here, but I'm just trying to be quick, is the mechanistic critique of vitalism very often is that it's kind of vitality or living or life or whatever we want to call a thing is kind of a special category. And it's kind of weird that, hey, you vitalistic guys, is life really that special? Why doesn't a rock have life? Why doesn't a planet have life? It sort of does, and then you start getting into really fucked up things. And it goes down rabbit holes. It's a lot like we were just going through the critique of the vitalist critique of sort of this mechanistic thing where mechanistic can never reproduce itself. People reproduce itself. It's like, that's not really how that works. But now they're going the other way, and we're going to talk through sort of the energy of this stuff. We use the term libido to designate the specific energy of desiring machines, and the transformations of this energy, Newman and Voluptus, are never desexualizations or sublimations. I'm actually going to pause. Libido, sexual energy for Freud. It's the thrust of life, the push of life, stemming from, I don't know, pick a fucking thing that inspired him to start talking about this, from the will to power to there's a lot. There was a lot of this idea of like this force pushing through things. For Freud, it's sexual, procreative, creative, pushing, creating more. And for him, libido needed to be handled properly through the superego and ego, where you desexualize and sublimate energy. So that way, and there's a great American Dad episode on this where he learned to not touch himself or not think of sex by whittling and doing woodwork, and how he turned his energy from that into woodworking. It doesn't work out in the end, obviously, but that's kind of literally what this is about. The idea that you can take that nervous energy, that creative, I want to be doing something, and desexualize and sublimate and turn it into healthy social energy that can be used properly in a civilized manner. Civilized. Big word for Freud. Important one for this. Germans. This terminology indeed seems extremely arbitrary. Considering the two ways in which the desiring machines must be viewed, what they have to do with a properly sexual energy is not immediately clear. Either they are assigned to the molecular order that is their own, or they are assigned to the molar order, where they form the organic or social machines and invest organic or social surroundings. It is, in fact, difficult to present sexual energy as directly cosmic or intra-atomic, and at the same time as directly social historical. It'd be futile to say that love has to do with proteins and society. This would amount to reviving yet once more the old attempts at liquidating Freudianism by substituting for the libido a vague cosmic energy capable of all the metamorphoses, or a kind of socialized energy capable of all of the investments. Or we would do better to review Reich's final attempt involving a biogenesis that, not without justification, is qualified as a schizoparanoiac mode of reasoning. It'll be remembered that Reich concluded in favor of an intra-atomic cosmic energy, the orgone, regenerative of an electrical flux and carrying submicroscopic particles, the bions, not prions, bions. This energy produced differences in potential or intensities distributed on the body, considered from a molecular point of view, and was associated with the mechanics of fluids in the same body considered from a molar viewpoint. What defined the libido as sexuality was therefore the association of the two modes of operation, mechanical and electrical, in a sequence with two poles, molar and molecular. Mechanical tension, electrical charge, electrical discharge, mechanical relaxation. Reich thought he had thus overcome the alternative between mechanism and vitalism, since these functions, mechanical and electrical, existed in matter in general, but were combined in a particular sequence within the living. And above all, he upheld the basic psychoanalytic truth, the supreme disavowal of which he was able to denounce in Freud: the independence of sexuality with regard to reproduction, the subordination of progressive or regressive reproduction to sexuality as a cycle. Just to read the beginning, all of Reich's last studies, biocosmique to biogenetique, are summarized at the end of Wilhelm Reich, the function of the orgasm. The primacy of sexuality over generation and reproduction comes to be based on the cycle of sexuality, mechanical tension-related electrical charge, which leads to a division of the cell. But very early in his work, Reich reproached Freud for having abandoned the sexual position. It was not only the dissidents from Freud who abandoned this position, it was Freud himself in a certain fashion, a first time when he introduces the death instinct. This is going to be a lot. So there's kind of a lot of ways to go about talking about this section, this paragraph. One is I could spend a lot of time talking about things that then you basically have to forget. I hate doing that. Like, let me explain Reich's orgone and the nature of a cosmic energy in which everything is infused. And it's, I mean, if you can't notice, they're not exactly charging down that direction. They're not like, oh, Reich nailed it. No. Reich's in the right direction, they basically are saying, and they're saying, he gave a last attempt trying to do this. But they're saying that this is the fucked up thing. This is one of the problems with how we do this, is we have this sort of play that there's sexual energy and then there's desexualized energy, the sublimated energy through Freud. And they're sidestepping it. They open it up. We've got 3 types of energy. It's libido, that transforms into numen and voluptas. They go through what numen is, the energy of recording, voluptas, the different energy of affect or sensation. Voluptuous affect is Klosowski's big jam. There's a reason that they're using this term. Klosowski's the reason. Klosowski's the reason. Just letting you know. Klosowski's the fucking reason. But for them, they're like, this setup, they're never desexualizing it or sublimating it. It's all the same. It's all libido, but it's transformed, and how it works and what it does, and a few things based on the syntheses and how it's used. And desexualizing or sublimating it feels weird. And that's what they're saying at the opening. Is like, it's always been weird and felt arbitrary to say that there's energy that is desexualized. Still creative energy, possibly, also becomes nervous energy in a neurotic or psychotic, or like it's weird. They've never been a fan of it. And so they start talking through, and they go through, it is in fact difficult to present sexual energy as directly cosmic and intra-atomic, at the same time directly socio-historical. This is not, it's dumb. Basically, they're saying, like, it's dumb to say love has to do with proteins in society. That's not really what they're talking about here. They're trying to get us, again, to step away from these ideas traditionally thought of, that you've got this desexualization, or that it's some other thing. They don't want to do that. They're not making that move. They talk about Reich's attempt which is a large amount of this, which seems like, and it's obviously, if you're not looking, this is what a lot of people take from this book, is like this paragraph. They're like, oh, excellence, like energy flowing through everything. And they start getting into the orgone, and they're like, no. That's not the thing. The issue is Reich thought, like, this is their critique, is Reich thought he had overcome the alternative between mechanism and vitalism, since these functions, mechanical and electrical, existed in matter generally, but were combined in a particular sequence within living. That was what Reich went into, basically. It was a unique sequence produced us as people, and that's what makes us special. Genuinely, this is just vitalism through a mechanistic lens, in my opinion, but yeah. Also, I think through theirs. Above all, he upheld the basic psychoanalytic truth, the supreme disavowal of which he was able to denounce in Freud. So this is weirdly worded. But for him, sorry, I'll be very specific here. For Freud, for Lacan, for all these other guys, including Reich, Zondi even, the basic psychoanalytic truth is the thing that they're upholding, that there is an independence of sexuality with regard to reproduction, the subordination of progressive or regressive reproduction to sexuality as a cycle. This is this basic psychoanalytic truth that they're saying that he's upholding, the supreme disavowal of which he was able to denounce in Freud because of the creation of the death instinct. We'll get into what all this means in the next paragraph, because this is really one paragraph in the French. It makes it easier. But that's kind of what's happening here. So it's a lot of, boy, understand all this, also throw it out. But at the basic level, it's like, yeah, this is why we're doing this thing we're doing. This is why we've got our energy of desiring machines and the transformations of that energy. It's not at any point becoming desexualized. Sex and creation and reproduction are part and parcel of this. They've been talking about reproduction for the last few paragraphs, if you haven't noticed. The nature of reproduction, how things are reproduced, and the power of reproduction, and the force of reproduction. And it's not about the separation of desire from reproduction. It's not that sexuality and reproduction can be separate, which is very much for Freud a thing that, God, yeah. It's just a depressing way to have to look at things, that you can separate reproduction from sex. It's like, no, you can't. You can separate maybe human reproduction, you can't. Reproduction and sexual drive is the thing. Libido is the energy of desire machines. Reproduction is the energy at the basis of things. And it's not about desexualizing any of this. It's not about desexualizing any of this. That's their argument. So don't try. That's this thing at the bottom here. And also, they're making fun of the orgone because the orgone's funny to me. The orgone's funny to me too. Following? Everyone following?
Yeah, I'm following, but
yes.
I already yesterday finished seminar 1, right, of Lacan, and
seminar 1. Which one's seminar 1? Sorry,
hinting about the seminar 1 of Lacan, the Freud paper on technique.
Oh, okay,
right?
yeah, okay.
The
Sorry.
lectures, right?
Yes.
And what he hint in, and correct me if I'm wrong, right? I'm willing. Like what he
just so you know,
is
I'm
like,
not going to be able to correct anyone on Lacan. If you're talking about a seminar specifically, I'm just going to kind of maybe lightly disagree at best, because I'm not going to even pretend I understand any of that. We have a couple people here, I think, who are better versed, but we'll see.
Okay, so he maintained the distinction between like the the ego, or the libidinal ego and libidinal drive, right?
Mm-hmm.
During the first stages of what he called like captation, right? And what he distinction between animals and human beings and yada yada. It gives me a hint that like that is what he talking about is relevant to kind of what Lacan talked about when he and Freud, right, maintained the distinction between the libidinal drive and between the ego libido, or the libidinal ego, right? And he have to maintain these distinctions, right? And Lacan didn't give like in seminar 1 didn't give like a convincing argument for maintaining this distinction. Although Jung, right, Carl Jung, they made a criticism against Carl Jung that Carl Jung didn't maintain this distinction, and he viewed libidinal drive and libido or libidinal ego as the same thing, right? And Freud, and to give it context, right, Freud and Lacan accused Jung of having a like what Lacan called roughly phrase it, a psychic pantheism, right? A psychic pantheism, right? Mm-hmm. And I don't know if that's relevant, right? Maybe I'm wrong, but I don't know. I'm willing to anyone to correct me if I'm wrong about it or something.
So
right?
The closest I'd come, and I won't say you're necessarily wrong on any of this. So up front, just know that I'm, generally, just know I'm not like saying I'm right. Just I want to be very preface about this one. Like others, I'll argue a little bit more harshly, but my grasp on Lacan, when he's talking about the first seminar and what he's doing, is he's introducing, generally speaking, what he sees as the fount of libido, which is the position of desire lack, which is found in the mirror stages, and the symbolic chain that emerges from all of these interactions. So we end up with resistance, transference with the analyst and the analyst, a whole bunch of stuff. He introduces a ton of stuff, but his version in there is very much still the divorcing of sexual desire, libidinal desire, from reproduction. That it is still that thing. That there is
exactly.
And it's very much for him that the creation of libidinal desire is actually not about reproduction, that it's divorced from that. The reproduction is almost a side effect of this due to how we find ourselves separated and all of that, if that makes sense.
Exactly. It's actually one of the sentence that he said is that, which a Hegelian sentence, that the individual is dead in the sight of in the eyes of the species. So he kind of like talking about like the school, like the New York school, I think, of biology, which I kind of like read about, like dialectical biology by I forgot his name, Longstein, I don't know, but like dialectical, his book about dialectical biology, which has a tremendous influence on Suzaniyama, right?
Mm-hmm.
Dialectical biology, right? It's a 300 book, right? 300 page, right? You know, check it if you want to know the biology and these kind of things, and how like Lacan basically said, although I disagree with them, right? But check this out, like check about their idea, right? And he never like explain what the disagreement are in seminar 1. But you know, regardless, like you know, maybe in seminar 2 or seminar 3, I will discover something kind of like you know, intuitive. But yeah.
And Brett has a comment. I may have misspoken. I don't think I did. But Rier was not into psychic pantheism, which implies the sort of a god element or theistic element, but was into panpsychism. It was a panpsych. It's a nuance. It's a nuance, Brett, but it's fair. It's a fair comment. I'm not, yeah. But again, and they're talking about that. They're kind of, again, playing with that. But this paragraph specifically is playing with that thing about the separation of reproduction from sex, from desire. And again, reproduction is a thing an organism does. And as we understood more of the mechanistic view of the world, look, we can separate out the organism, the vitalistic element, separated from the mechanistic, the reproduction of things, the production of things. And so how do we fit those together? Well, it's through this. It's because sexuality is ultimately not directly connected to the act of reproduction or autoproduction, all this. And I'll just mention it's probably a little important to D&G. So that's the baseline I have there. Any notes, anything before we move a little bit further? Because it's there's a lot of references coming here very quick. So many in one paragraph. Jesus Christ. We'll just do quick. If the details of Reich's final theory are taken into consideration, we admit that it is simultaneously schizophrenic and paranoid, that its simultaneously schizophrenic and paranoid nature is no obstacle where we are concerned. On the contrary, we admit that any comparison of sexuality with cosmic phenomena such as electrical storms, the blue color of the sky and the blue-gray of atmospheric haze, the blue of the orgone, St. Elmo's fire and the bluish formations of sunspot activity, fluids and flux, matter and particles, in the end, appear to us more adequate than the reduction of sexuality to the pitiful little familialist secret. We think that Lawrence and Miller have a more accurate evaluation of sexuality than Freud, even from the viewpoint of the famous scientificity. It is not the neurotic stretched out on the couch who speaks to us of love, of its force and its despair, but the mute stroll of the schizo. Lenz's outing in the mountains and under the stars, the immobile voyage in intensities on the body without organs. As to the whole of Reichian theory, it possesses the incomparable advantage of showing the double pole of the libido as a molecular formation on the submicroscopic scale and as an investment of the molar formations on the scale of social and organic aggregates. All that is missing is the confirmations of common sense. Why, in what sense, is this sexuality? It's a great last question. Again, touching into, it's a little important to them. But there's a couple sentences I want to go over. And again, if anyone has questions, now would be the time to start asking, because as we make the next move, it's going to start getting poetic, but poetic in like a beautiful sense, and it's going to be, I'm going to be captured. So be ready for that. But these earlier bits that they're talking about are notes from Reich about the things that he saw, the cosmic phenomena of the world that he saw, the electrical storms, blue color of the sky, blue-gray of atmospheric haze, the blue of the Orgone, St. Elmo's fire, the bluish formations of sunspot activity. All of these things are more adequate than the reduction of sexuality to a pitiful little familial secret. This is the right direction to go. It's all of this stuff feels more, it feels better. It's the right stuff. It's not quite there though. It's not quite there because when we talk about, and Lawrence and Miller, Lawrence, they're talking about D.H. Lawrence. I read out of Phoenix 1 and Phoenix 2. Some of my favorite poetry is out of there these days. Highly recommend D.H. Lawrence. Also Miller, Tropic of Cancer, Tropic of like wonderful writer. But their evaluation of sexuality, there's a reason they've quoted them many more times. They prefer it to Freud because, again, Freud's scientificity, this sort of spread of how he's pulled things away, it's not really him talking about sex. He's trying to get as far away from it as possible. If you've read Freud, he's definitely trying to get as far away from sex as he fucking can. Like, guy had some issues. But the line they have, it's not the neurotic stretched out on the couch who speaks to us of love, of its force and its despair, but the mute stroll of, I'm going to change schizo, of the autist. This, because that's what they're referring to. The schizophrenic, as we know today, and we talk about today, would you ever say the mute stroll of the schizophrenic? There's phrasings that they're using very particularly here. Think of that person, how they're connecting to the world as they're moving through the silence of it, and how they're immediately ensconced in it, how they're immediately connecting to it, and all of that. Linz's outings in the mountains under the stars, the immobile voyage in intensities on the body without organs. This is what speaks of love. Connection, reproduction, love. As to the whole of Reichian theory, it possesses the incomparable advantage of showing the double pole of the libido, the libidinal energy they're talking about, the molecular formation on the submicroscopic, and as an investment of molar formations on the social and aggregate organic side. All that's missing is the confirmations of common sense. So why is this sexuality? In what sense is this sexuality? That's the question at the core of what they're getting at, and the core of this argument they've been pulling us through. How is this sexual? How is any of this that they're talking about sexual? Well, I really like the rest of this. So we're going to be, you'll probably hear it in my voice a little bit. Cynicism has said, or claims to have said, everything there is to say about love. That it is a matter of a copulation of social and organic machines on a large scale. At bottom, love is in the organs. At bottom, love is a matter of economic determinations, or money. But what is properly cynical is to claim a scandal where there is none to be found, and to pass for bold while lacking boldness. Better the delirium of common sense than its platitude, for the prime evidence points to the fact that desire does not take as its object persons or things, but the entire surroundings that it traverses, the vibrations and flux of every sort to which it is joined, introducing therein breaks and captures, an always nomadic and migrant desire, characterized first of all by its gigantism. No one has shown this more clearly than Charles Fourier. In a word, the social, as well as biological surroundings, are the object of unconscious investments that are necessarily desiring or libidinal, in contrast with the preconscious investments of need or of interest. The libido as sexual energy is the direct investment of masses, of large aggregates, and of social and organic fields. We have difficulty understanding what principles psychoanalysis uses to support its conception of desire when it maintains that the libido must be desexualized or even sublimated in order to proceed to the social investments, and inversely, that the libido only resexualizes these investments during the course of pathological regression, unless the assumption of such a conception is still familialism, that is, an assumption holding that sexuality operates only in the family, that it must be transformed in order to invest larger aggregates. They quote Freud here because it is about understanding where sexuality becomes captured, why we see these things, and how familialism is ruining it. To quote Freud from Three Case Histories, pretty important book from Freud, persons who have not freed themselves completely from the stage of narcissism, who, that is to say, have at that point a fixation which may operate as a disposing factor for a later illness, are exposed to the danger that some unusually intense wave of libido, finding no other outlet, may lead to a sexualization of their social instincts, and so undo the work of sublimation, which they had achieved in the course of their development. This result may be produced by anything that causes the libido to flow backwards, that causes a regression. Paranoiacs endeavor to protect themselves against any such sexualization of their social instincts, instinctual cathexes. The phrasing, and we'll just go back to the paragraph. I think this is very, very poetic. I do. And it's not poetry, and it's not allegorical. They're very much direct, but I really like this idea. I really, really, really like it. We do live in a deeply cynical age. Cynicism is the sort of idea that you're bearing things down to their bottom level or whatever. And so it's, oh, no, it's only because you have these instinctual hormonal reactions, and there's pheromonal reactions within the body that causes a certain release of these chemicals. That's why you feel love. Rick and Morty fans, basically, Redditors, whatever. But at the bottom, it's in the organs. At the bottom, love is a matter of economic determination. You only really need to love someone because you economically benefit from the transaction and blah, blah, blah. But really what they're saying, and then the line, and it's a great line, what is properly cynical is to claim a scandal where there's none to be found, to pass for bold while lacking boldness. That's a phrase that I feel like we need to be using a lot more these days. It's a great phrase. It's a great phrase.
Better the delirium of common sense than its platitude, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's a very interesting kind of sentence, because what we know about delirium, right?
Mm-hmm.
We know it about Hume, right? And when he said that even an itch in your fingers could torment you and makes you, kind of like, want to destroy the entire world, right? Even an itch in your finger, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it's a very interesting thing, right? If you recourse to volume 2 of Passions by Hume, you can understand that passions can hinder other passions. It's not reason. It's not all of it is reason, right? It's not reason that at the end of the day, it's not reason. All of it is reason that do these kind of things, right? In terms of desire, right?
Yes.
Sometimes it's delirious. Sometimes it's and that's what the sentence implied to me. The better the delirium of common sense than its platitude, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Very much. And so, to just sort of to restate that there's so many just great little lines in this, and I fucking just feel like I could talk about all of this. But it's the idea of cynicism, to talk about love in these very basic ways and to not give it room. They're talking about it, to stand away from like the romantic version, right? As a thing, to step away from that. They have the line following what we just said. For the prime evidence points to the fact that desire does not take as its object persons or things, but the entire surrounding it traverses, the vibrations and flux of every sort to which it has enjoined. The nomadic way that it's always, as I say, suffering from like a gigantism. It's far more than we think, connecting out into a space more than we think, and always taking in all of the things that are around it. This is the connection that's always happening. This is the thing that's at play when the mute autist makes his way, the schizo, as they phrase, is out in the world. It's not just them as an organism and maybe their feet are touching the ground. They're in connection with everything. Now, we don't physically see it in the same way, but they are. There's always sensory apparati that are firing off, that are connecting in every single way, tons of ways. Desiring machines firing. So there's connections always happening. Desire doesn't really take as its object a whole person. You don't fall in love, like, and they'll be getting to this. Love isn't really about like, oh, a love for you. It's molar to molar. And so how does this work and how is it set up? So when we talk about the bottom, it's like, well, it's these other, no. This is, again, sort of misstepping and taking this hyper-cynical view, which they're not. The social as well as biological surroundings are the object of unconscious investments that are necessarily desiring or libidinal, in contrast with the preconscious investments of need or interest. This is going to become real important. And it's super important politically right now. The difference between the preconscious and the preconscious, they do unconscious, preconscious. They have very particular wording that they use for this. Consciously is what you're thinking of. When I say, hey, how are you feeling today? And you go, and you think consciously, what are you aware of? What are you doing? How are you feeling? All that stuff you can be conscious of. Preconscious is your preconscious investments. It's the ideas of what your needs are at any given time. Whole bodies tend to be in this space. It's your investments of need or interest. But before that, the unconscious investments there that exist, they're necessarily desiring, they're libidinal, and the social as well as biological surroundings overall are the object of this. The libido as sexual energy is the direct investment of masses, of large aggregates, and of social and organic fields. This is basically the large molar in aggregate. Love is love. Love. There you go. We have difficulty understanding what principles psychoanalysis uses to support its conception of desire, when it maintains that libido must be desexualized or even sublimated in order to proceed to social investments. It's not. Desiring, it's directly invested in large. This is what's happening, and it is in aggregate, those things together become this other element. There's no need to desexualize. There's not. You're just talking about the laws of large numbers that we exist as. We are the aggregate. We are the molar. As a thing. This is how the machinic and the organism come together, as they're describing through desiring production and all of this. This play matters unless the assumption of such a conception is still familialism, an assumption holding that sexuality operates only in the family and must be transformed in order to invest in larger aggregates. That's kind of where we get the rub. Sex is meant for reproducing the family, taking care of the family. It's properly experienced inside of with psychoanalysis. You may desire your mother, but your father prevents that, so you hate him. Sex is within the family. You find an example of, speaking of the three, you want that maid that you saw because it reminds you of a woman you knew when you were younger who reminded you of your mother. Like this kind of shit that is kind of what piles in. But everything is sexual. And it's all the little bits, attracted to little bits, investing in little bits at large becomes this other thing, becomes what we see as this other bit. And that's where this next paragraph comes. Is everyone following so far? They're going to have a better explanatory thing coming up. That's why I'm not spending a ton of time on this, but the big deal is this line that obviously is a pain in the ass because it crosses over. The libido as sexual energy, when we talk about libidinal energy as sexual energy, is the direct investment of masses. The phrase in the French that they say, invested, yeah, it's close enough. Fuck it, close enough. It's, I think, close enough. Yeah, directly invest is, libido as sexual energy is the direct investment of masses, of large ensembles and organic and social fields. The direct investment of, little bit, lots of little bits, all at once, the direct investment of all of these things, of masses, large aggregates, ensemble, and of social and organic fields. This is the thing that they're talking about. Everyone following? I haven't had anyone say anything in a little bit. And a couple of you in Discord, YouTube is not talking at all anymore, which is fine. Weirdos. What's up, Marcellus?
In the previous, how can I say, lectures or kind of readings, right? We kind of talking about social machines, desire machines, and how there's a sentence, I forgot the sentence, but it talk about that the desire machine doesn't determined by the family, right? It doesn't I don't know, I remember, but back in, I think in chapter 3, I think we're in chapter 4, I guess.
Yes.
Are we in chapter? Yeah, in chapter 3, when you kind of explain to us about that it's not determined by the family, right? It's not like the desire machine and social machine, and it's not I remember, maybe I will recourse to it and I'll share it, right, for the sake of time. But now I understand why it's not determined by the family. It's not the family, right? The representation, right? The representation of the family.
It's, as Estelle says, and I think it's the line, is social machines are desire machines under determinate conditions. And so when we talk about those determinate conditions, the determinate conditions are in mass, at large, the aggregates, the ensemble, the however we want to, the aggregate. It is the law of large numbers, the molar. There's a reason they use molar, the molar. Bunch of shit thrown together, because at large, there's a different interaction than singular. And it's a different thing. And so when we talk about these large groupings, it's not that the family is the only place for sexuality. It's that sexuality is everywhere. It's everywhere. It's how it surfaces doesn't have to be it's about the line I love, and they're going to come to say it. They've said it a little bit before, is finding your non-human sex. They don't mean fucking alien. What they mean is the human sexuality that we're married to, where we say sexuality only happens in the family, because I go about my day and I only have sex with my wife, and I kind of don't want to really have sex with other people, and I'm not really it's but you're fucking it up, because it's not that's sexuality. It's not, that's a human sexuality. But we're not talking about human sexuality here. We're talking about sexuality, the drive, libidinal sexuality, which is molecular. And there's no humans at the molecular. So there's no such thing as human sexuality. Instead, we've got at large things that become attracted, that have sexual connections, that have desire routes, you might say, in aggregate. And that's this next paragraph. I'm just going to go straight to it, because it's, when I've said that this is important politically, this is one of my favorite paragraphs in the book, and it's super important. So I'm just going to dive straight to it because it's awesome. The truth is that sexuality is everywhere. Everywhere. The way a bureaucrat fondles his records, a judge administers justice, a businessman causes money to circulate, the way the bourgeoisie fucks the proletariat and so on. Is a little cute little French humor. There's no need to resort to metaphors any more than for the libido to go by way of metamorphoses. Hitler got the fascists sexually aroused. Flags, nations, armies, banks get a lot of people aroused. A revolutionary machine is nothing if it does not acquire at least as much force as these coercive machines have for producing breaks and mobilizing flux. It is not through a desexualizing extension that the libido invests the large aggregates. On the contrary, it is through a restriction, a blockage, and a reduction that the libido is made to repress its flux in order to contain them in the narrow cells of the type couple, family, person, objects. And doubtless such a blockage is necessarily justified. The libido does not come to consciousness except in relation to a given body, a given person that takes it as object. But our object choice itself refers to a conjunction of flux of life and of society that this body and this person intercept, receive, and transmit, always within a biological, social, and historical field where we are equally immersed or with which we communicate. The persons to whom our loves are dedicated, including the parental persons, intervene only as points of connection, of disjunction, of conjunction of flux, whose libidinal tenor of a properly unconscious investment they translate. Thus, no matter how well grounded the love blockage is, it curiously changes its function depending on whether it engages desire in the Oedipal impasses of the couple and the family in the service of the repressive machines, or whether, on the contrary, it condenses a free energy capable of fueling a revolutionary machine. Here again, everything has already been said by Fourier when he shows the two contrary directions of captivation or the mechanization of the passions. But we always make love with worlds. Our love addresses itself to this libidinal property of our lover to either close himself off or open up to more spacious worlds, to masses and large aggregates. There is always something statistical in our loves and something belonging to the laws of large numbers. And isn't it in this way that we must understand the famous formula of Marx? The relationship between man and woman is, quote, the direct, natural, and necessary relation of person to person, quote. That is, the relationship between the two sexes, man and woman, is only the measure of the relationship of sexuality in general, insofar as it invests large aggregates, man and man. Whence what came to be called the species determination of the sexuality of the two sexes. And must it not also be said that the phallus is not one sex, but sexuality in its entirety, which is to say the sign of the large aggregate invested by the libido, whence the two sexes necessarily derive both in their separation, the two homosexual series of man and man, woman and woman, and in their statistical relations within this aggregate? Pause there, because it's a really fucking great, it's really great fucking paragraph. And it immediately continues, and it does in the French, by the way. It immediately continues because this is not the final point they're making, but I want to just go back to a couple of things, and we will end up doing this again. I'm going to come all the way back. We're going to go through both this and the next paragraph, because why the fuck not? This is only, it's a shorter, it should just be part of it. Sexuality is everywhere. That's the lines. That's it. Sexuality is everywhere. They don't want us to have the conversation around, hey, we have to sublimate sexual desire. We have a desire to connect and reproduce. That desire we must find a way to utilize in a different form in order to be good and civilized. It's like, no. You don't get away from it. Desire machines don't like stop fucking everything. Everything is fucking. Everything's fucking. All non-human shit is fucking. And I love their examples The bureaucrat fondling his records. Fucking love that. The judge administering justice. Businessmen causing money to circulate. The bourgeoisie fucking the proletariat. They go a little far with that because that is the sort of joke. But it's not the line here, and it's very apropos. Hitler got the fascists sexually aroused. Flags, nations, armies, and banks get a lot of people aroused. It's important to remember. It's important to remember they got aroused. They do. It's not knocking them. I hate to break it to everyone. Generally speaking, most of us will be aroused by a lot of these things. That's just as a bunch of us are in various capacities. This is the thing is the way that we're brought into the world, the way the world exists. It's not, it's, hey, they're carrying our flag. I know a lot of people that doesn't necessarily have to mean a giant red flag with a swastika or an American flag, but flags that mean things to people and the arousal that you experience in a large group. Anyone who has actually wandered with the BLM protests that happened, anyone who has been part of an Occupy protest, these things, you feel aroused. And it's not that you want to fuck everyone. That's not what this means. Aroused is affective. It's a heightened experience. It's your heightened sort of receptivity, heightened experience overall. Who's Stella, is that you? What's Marcellus? Solidarity is arousing. Sure.
The word. Yeah.
Solid. There's a lot. You got something for me, Estelle?
Oh, well, so like they want to dissolve any kind of distinction between, well, or like they don't want to make a distinction between what is considered sexual and what's not considered sexual, or like that they're saying that this leads people in weird directions, or in those directions, to really insist on this is not sexual or this is sexual.
Everything's sexual.
Yeah.
Everything's sexual. There's a great Moral Oral, great animated stop motion cartoon put up by Dino Stamatopoulos, who's wonderful. But there's this character who runs the library who's like the most repressed, angry, like conservative woman archetype librarian who is sexually aroused by everything, including eggs, where she and it's this huge, it's an entire episode's based on it, but it's this thing that runs throughout the series. This isn't like, he's not making fun of like some random librarian he knew. The way that everything is sexual, we find ourselves, things are connecting, things are moving, we find ourselves aroused, heightened, impassioned, these things that happen. This is all sexual. Now, I don't like think that a bureaucrat wants to stick his dick in his records. Probably some do, but it's not like necessity for this. That's the human sex. In order to talk about sexuality, we're talking about the molecular connection, the molecular drives that in mass are being invested in this way. So when we talk about sexual desire and arousal, we're talking about in mass, the desire machines, and it's everywhere. There's no real stopping sex. Like there is in the sense of like catatonia, where it's non-connective. But like priests, I mean, do I have to say that priests are fucking not filled with desire and lust and having their own issues and filled, like they're still aroused by things. Everyone's aroused, despite as much as they may want to be the hermit who lives in a fucking nowhere in a cave. There's arousal that happens. It still happens. This is the setup. Sexuality is everywhere. It's not as a thing. It's we try to package it. We try to push it in, and we create problems through the process. But sexuality is making its way, I think would be the way I'd phrase it. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Jimbo asked, didn't Freud try to reduce all motivations down to sexual drive? Down to human sexual drive, yes. And for Freud, it was, you want to fuck everything when you're younger, and we need to teach you properly how to turn that sexual energy into desexualized, sublimated energy that you can use socially. So the way that you would find, your sexual, whatever it is, your desires, lusts, whatever, helpfully turning them into sitting down and working for hours, putting that energy into something else, figuring out how to put that energy somewhere, sublimating. It's a simplified version, but again, human sex. They're beyond that. They're having a very different conversation and saying at the base, it's about all the connections and the push towards it, the desiring machines and their attractions or repulsions. And in aggregate, you have attraction to attraction. It's my favorite line in the entire thing is, was it in, it's here. It's one of my favorite lines. We always make love with worlds. Fucking, if there is poetry in this book, it's that sentence. We don't fuck a person. That's not how things work. There's, no one does this. No one fucks a person. There is a multitude of things that are in that from the moment that you decide it might be a possibility to the moment of orgasm. There's no person in person. It is a multitude of connections and repulsions and attractions that are all interacting in incredibly complex ways. It is a world fucking a world. It is worlds that we make love with worlds. Our love addresses itself to this libidinal property of our lover, either to close himself up or open up to more spacious worlds, to masses and large aggregates. This is incredible language that I really, really love. Really love. Can we sublimate non-human sexuality? No. We'll get into sort of how it gets trapped, but life finds a way, you might say. Rudd says, I'm still stuck how it isn't still a metaphor. Even at a simple order, the capacity of being able to be horny for things is a metaphor. Describing things as it's like as is literally language of metaphor and simile. Well, yes, but they don't mean it metaphorically, even though at the end they use the way that the bourgeoisie fucks the proletariat. They don't really mean that metaphorically either. And so it's fun language. It's fun language for sure. But they're not saying is like this. They're not saying the way a bureaucrat fondles his records is like sexuality. That's the thing. It is that. They're not using like as a thing. Let me see. Where's the word like in this? Not seeing it. Way a bureaucrat fondles his records, blah, 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 and so on. There's no need to resort to metaphors anymore for the libido to go by way of metamorphoses. Hitler got the fascists sexually aroused. They're not mincing words in that rut. That's it. Boom. This is the thing. He is arousing them. The bureaucrat is aroused by his records as he goes through them. I can tell you, behind me, you see a nightmare of bookshelves. Going through them and organizing them, and then once they were done and I had them in the places I want so I can find the things, it's arousing. And it doesn't mean that I want to fuck my bookshelves. That's not what we're talking about. That's the human side. We're not talking about human fucking. We're talking about desiring machines. And that I experienced that as this thing, the judge administering justice. He's aroused by that. He's not repulsed by it. He's aroused by it. There's a businessman causing money to circulate. These are arousals. They're not using it as a metaphor. They're boom. They're right there. It's the way it is. Bat says, the way I understand this as not being metaphorical is through a callback, everything in desire at the beginning of the book. We literally have the existential horn. Sorry, I'm not following. Maybe I'm too dumb. Because again, horniness is, as a thing, horniness is a human arousal by human thing. It's a very particular type of arousal, right? It's a very particular type of sexuality. They're not saying that's not sexuality either, but they're asking, why would that stop when you start talking about, my grandfather used to build train sets and he would spend hours on it. And it made him, when he put them down, he would sigh really loud, like a satisfaction sigh. And he's not alone. I paint models. And my kids It's the same thing. He builds Lego shit and he loves it. He loves building Lego stuff and it excites him and arouses him. It's not about sex. Like in that sense, it's not the human sex. This is the thing when we talk about all the way down, and this is the reason they're relating all these things. Is DNA, as it's reproducing, about fucking? No, it's about reproduction and connection. It's about producing. It's about the energy of it. It's about these things being produced as they're producing, the reproduction of things. These elements coming together, at large, we call human fucking, but it's not that. I'm not DNA fucking DNA. That's not what people are. I am at large the aggregate of things that are me. Law of large numbers. And I'm attracted. I'm aroused by another person. It's world to world. It's not single to single. There is no single organism that's in love with someone else or fucking someone else. It's a world of organisms that are doing it. A world of machines, desiring machines. All of it is that.
Molecular to molar, right?
Yes.
So the molar would be the thing. You have molecular thing that like working in aggregate, right? And you show us in necessity and chance how these kind of things, the theosophy working in chaos, right? Like they create kind of induction, right? And you said the 4 stages. I'm still want to read the book, right? But like basically it creates, it's within itself, right? It creates its own thing, and it doesn't have like an organized like way, right, to create this kind of molar function. But this molar function is in line with other moral functions, right, that sometimes do the same thing and sometimes do otherwise, right?
I'm going to say
if that
stay
makes
tuned.
sense.
I'm going to say stay tuned because I could give a simpler answer, but I kind of don't want to, because when we talk about like the molar function, it's not really a function, and they're going to be getting into that. Like the molar function we see as one, but it's not really what's happening there. Like when we get down to the functions, not the content, we're talking about desiring production at its base level. So like, for example, LJ has a line in here, and it's, I think, perfect example. Why are girls not excited by cars and Legos like boys? They are. They are. They are. People are excited by things. Now, why are boys or girls not? Well, again, what is that collection of world that is a girl or a boy? Girls from very early on, and this is even still, and I say this as a dad who's like I don't even like gender as a thing, but it kind of hits you in weird ways. You treat boys a little rougher, girls a little stronger. The toy aisles are assigned very differently from the beginning. Very early stuff for girls is focused around the language of babies and pretty princesses and hair and makeup. Like, go look at diapers for little girls. They exist as a thing versus little boys. Look at the movies and TV shows for little girls and little boys from birth on. And the way, again, mom and dad were also raised, and their worlds that are being visited by all of these same things. So as a girl, an organism at large is a girl, as we've decided that at large, what she is aroused by or what she's carried on by is part of this. And this is, again, it exists historically, socially, and all of these things as a continuous process that's falling back on itself. That's the thing. So when I talk about my son likes this, my daughter doesn't, which I didn't say, my daughter really, really loves building, but she also is doing her own thing, and it's very different. These things we see as girls or boys. These are aggregates at large, in the same way we talk about sex at large. But no one's a girl or a boy molecularly. Everyone is both and neither as a thing. My big toes are rarely male or female as an example, or the cell of a big toe may have coding in there for male or female. Perhaps we can have that conversation, but it's a different beast, whole different beast when we start talking about how they codified these things into rules. And then I need to do a video on this, and then ultimately overcoded, and we got to where capitalism's at. So when we talk about these things playing through, when we talk about sexuality, it's all molecular. It's all molecular. And then we become the way that it's seen. The phrasing that they use, which I really like, is the relationship between the two sexes, man, woman, is only the measure of a relationship of sexuality in general, insofar as it invests large aggregates, man and man, for example. Whence what came, we're going to go right to the next paragraph after this, because it's great. Whence what came to be called the species determination of the sexuality of the two sexes. And must it not also be said that the phallus is not one sex, but sexuality in its entirety, which is to say, the sign of the large aggregate invested by the libido, whence the two sexes necessarily derive, both in their separation, the two homosexual series of man, man, woman, woman, and in their statistical relations within this aggregate. But Marx says something even more mysterious, that the true difference is not the difference between the two sexes, but the difference between the human sex and the, quote, non-human sex. It is clearly not a question of animals, nor of animal sexuality. Something quite different is involved. If sexuality is the unconscious investment of the large molar aggregates, it is because, on its other side, sexuality is identical with the interplay of the molecular elements that constitute these aggregates under determinate conditions. The dwarfism of desire as a correlate to its gigantism. Sexuality and the desiring machines are one and the same, inasmuch as these machines are present and operating in the social machines, in their field, their formation, their functioning. Desiring machines are the non-human sex, the molecular machinic elements, their arrangement and their syntheses, without which there would be neither a human sex specifically determined in the large aggregates, nor a human sexuality capable of investing these aggregates. In a few sentences, Marx, who is nonetheless so miserly and reticent where sexuality is concerned, exploded something that will hold Freud and all of psychoanalysis forever captive: the anthropomorphic representation of sex. This is the bit here on Marx, worth digging into. Great line that they're using, and I really love how they do this. I know I'm not alone in that. I think it was Bat's was like, yeah, I love what they're doing with it. What they do with Marx here is so fucking great. I really fucking love it. But that thing, this is what we're talking about. It's the non-human sex. It's not a question of an animalistic, oh, look, it's your lizard brain firing off. Oh, it's your animalistic sexuality. It's like, no. We're not like this one singular thing that has layers of other things in it. Like stupid shit like that. No, we are a constellation, incredibly complex mass aggregate of these things. If sexuality is the unconscious investment of the large molar aggregates, Brooks, for example, or you, sexuality is the unconscious investment of the large molar aggregates, it is because, on its other side, sexuality is identical with the interplay of the molecular elements that constitute these aggregates under determinate conditions. I am sexually attracted to things. Molar, big, mole, or at large, in large numbers. But then on the other side, yeah, there's something going on. There's interplays of molecular elements that constitute these aggregates under determinate conditions. The interplay of those molecular elements at large is my sexual desire towards a thing. It's not one-to-one. It's not a desiring machine connects and therefore I want to fuck X or Y, or I want to jerk off in a bus or whatever the fuck. No, it's complicated. There's a lot of them. Many of them. Almost too many to count, almost as if we're talking about the molecular or the molar. Two sides of the word mole are in there for a fucking reason. Right?
Yeah. There is a sentence that I didn't understand, right?
Please.
And it's very important. Quote, whose nonetheless is, so this sentence, desiring machine are non-human sex, I understand it, but the molecular quote the molecular machinic elements and their arrangement and their synthesis, without which there would be neither a human sex specifically determined in large aggregates, nor a human sexuality capable of investing these aggregates. In a few sentences, Marx, who is nonetheless is miserly, prescient where sexuality is concerned, and exploded, something that will hold Freud and all psychoanalysis forever captive. The anthropomorph. That's the sentence that I didn't understand. The anthropomorphic representation of sex. What's this? What's this? I didn't understand it. I didn't understand the last bit. The anthropomorphic. What's the meaning of anthropomorphic?
It means when we say the human sex or non-human sex, the human sex is the anthropomorphic sex. Anthropomorphized means made in the shape of man, specifically. So when we say exploded something that will hold Freud and all of psychoanalysis forever captive, with them, all sex is necessarily human sex. It has to be. Sexuality is human. That there's an animal sex, but humans, like sex is a thing that a human has. It's not something that is even smaller. They may say like the id is like related to biological urges or whatever shit like that. That's the closest you kind of get. But sex is necessarily like the thing that makes human, the desire. Again, Lacan, desire is what gives rise to language and a whole bunch of shit that we've got.
Exactly.
And so, but this is anthropomorphic.
Yeah, this is anthropomorphic in terms of like, he kind of dismantle, like, he talked about the desire of animals that are about satisfaction, but we are different from animals, right? That we kind of like, we use different kind of mechanisms or ways of kind of like different like primary narcissism and secondary narcissism, right? But like, I understand what the section is that like.
So let's actually pull back slightly. Let's pull back slightly, because the reference to Marx here is the big deal of this paragraph, obviously, because he like, it's about that. So, God, I don't know where he wrote about this. This is where Marx, I want to say, I confuse a lot of Marx's shit with Capital.
Economic manuscript.
It is. This is where he's talking about what makes human reproduction different than animals. There's a little section he's got on that, because for him it's animals reproduce due to instinct. That's why they produce as they do. Humans, however, make a conscious choice. It's a little bit different. It's based in social needs, economic needs. It's conscious, and this is how he differentiates us from animals specifically. And he calls it, and he refers to it as non-human sex, which is the animalistic sex is non-human sex. Dogs meet, they fuck, and they have lots of puppies because there's just instinct. They don't think about the rest of it, but man does. It's super important to him, because for us, and we talk about our species sort of thing, the way for Marx and how he sort of comes with this stuff. Yeah, it is Economic and Philosophic Manuscripts, 1844. You're right. Sorry. I was just doing a mini search. But it's, our relationship to nature is shifted because necessarily under capitalism, our form of reproduction, how we're working, is necessarily alienated. And one of the things that differentiates us from animals is that our sexuality is conscious, as Marx said, versus the non-human, which is not conscious. It's instinctual. And they're saying, but wait. And this is where they're saying, well, actually, Marx did this, exploded this idea, and then Freud and psychoanalysis got fucked up by going, yes, it is what makes us different. Our sexuality is conscious, and we can do things with it. And they're like, no, Marx was on the right path. He just didn't go far enough, which is kind of Deleuze's, returning thing. And it's like, don't do this. Instead, understand that the very nature of production and reproduction as a thing, sexuality, connective, and this producing thing, like, realize that, as they say, sexuality is an investment of large molar aggregates, because on the other side, we have molecular elements that constitute them under determinate conditions. There's the dwarfism to the gigantism, as they phrase it. So sexuality and desiring machines are one and the same, in as much as these machines are present and operating in social machines, in their field, their formation, and in their functionings. Desiring machines are the non-human sex. It's not so much that it's us versus animals as the non-human, but instead going even further than that and realizing that the way that these things are produced and how everything's produced from desiring production, that's where sex is. And then we become a sexualized entity by the unique configuration of all of their investments at the molar being attracted to things at large in another thing that is molar. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Sorry, it's a lot. I know.
So it's what Freud and Lacan is that they misrecognize the molar function to whom they kind of started. They misrecognize that the molar function. They think that this molar function is distinct, so they kind of like forgot other things that are quantity or have like the same resemblance to other moral functions. And right?
The beginning of the next...
That's what I'm understanding from you.
The beginning of the next paragraph I'll state, and then I want you to restate your question if it still exists. What we call anthropomorphic representation is just as much the idea that there are two sexes as the idea that there is only one. That's a line for Lacan. If you don't know, Lacan famously said that there's only man and women exist as an except, blah, blah. There's confusing, not going to get it, but anthropomorphic representation is just as much the idea there are two sexes as there is only one. It's not that we've conceived of this or this is how things are socially coded, but instead it's the very idea of conceiving these things that is the anthropomorphic representation of elements. When we say hunger, for example, I am hungry, is there like an anthropomorphic, yeah, that's anthropomorphized hunger. That's what it is. I am hungry. I'm embodying it. That's why the dad joke always lands where it's like, hello, Brooks, I'm hungry. Hello, hunger. My name's Brooks. That stupid line, because I am hungry. I am not hungry. I'm experiencing a series of complex sort of physical interactions, which interact with me as well as my history and everything that yield investments in particular ways, which make me want to go get pizza. Like, it's not that I want pizza, but instead the anthropomorphized reality of what desire machines are in mass, in aggregate, that I then claim as mine and I state out and I eat a pizza. But I'm no more eating a pizza as I am fucking someone else. It's a world fucking a world eating a world. There is a consistent everything that is desiring machines that we're parsing out and piecing out into anthropomorphized pieces of representation.
Mm. Yeah.
So LJ says, and so the machinic drives... Sorry, go ahead.
No, it's beyond the animal, like kind of the animal way of like what we mean non-human, and what Deleuze mean is that like it's beyond the animal kind of desire, right? It's beyond that. The non-human desire is the arousal of something like, for example, when you speak, like I don't want to do metaphor, but for example, when you have aroused, when you kind of learn a new language. Right? Like, let's say, for example, French or a German, and you're trying to kind of implement it to a teacher, a German teacher or French teacher, and you kind of aroused by kind of in my experience of kind of like talking to him, right? And he understanding, right? Very well. So that's like, we're talking about something beyond the kind of determination, beyond that, animal determination of desire.
Someone on YouTube says, Ali in YouTube says, so that means sometimes we don't need pizza. It's that we never needed pizza. That these are anthropomorphized representations of desiring machines and their investment at large. So it's not saying you don't need pizza. It's a little tougher than that. It's that there is no, like, as a thing, representations are the aggregate of such. So the need is on the other side. That's why they used the term before. On the other side, the social investments of desiring production at large that are attracted to that and pushing in these directions, making you go, I fucking need some pepperoni pizza. Or the way you get repulsed if I say Hawaiian pizza or whatever the fuck, because these are the collections of those things that we're giving ultimately voice to at the end of the syntheses and the end of the process. And we mistake the afterword of the process for the process itself. This is, again, why Marx they use here and why I love the use of Marx here, because Marx would never say that capital is what makes the factory. That would be stupid. That's like the opposite of Marx. That's like what Elon Musk would say. But no, wait. Capital doesn't make the factory because what is produced, the commodity that's produced, also doesn't make the factory. But wait, what makes the factory then? Well, the factory is a complex interrelations of machinery and organisms inside of a very specific social structure that's producing, and it's made because of other larger social structures and pressures. But the factory makes what it makes because of its contingent location, people, setup, materials available, and efficiencies. Like there's a whole bunch of stuff that's going in and out, causing things to be produced. You're not different. You are not different. You're not a factory. Instead, you're a really, really complicated, fucked up process that's even crazier than that. And ultimately, as part of this, you then go forward. So it's not so much that we don't need pizza. I mean, Judge Schreber had sunbeams coming out of his ass. Did he? Like literally? Maybe not, but we're not using metaphors. Schreber described them. Schreber wrote at length what they did, how they produced, the effect they had on him. So does it matter? Why does it matter if we actually need pizza or not? That's not the question, because that's again the bifurcation of these things, separating the representation from the non-human, separating the investment from what we think or the conscious world. It's not really the setup here. It's instead understanding these things go together, that these things are produced, that these things are all produced through this process and falls back on and gets fucked up inside of it. So understanding the process, grasping it, working within it, and understanding its limits is kind of what they're sort of pointing at. And that's the idea they're about to get into, which I normally would get into, but we're now 20 minutes over normal stopping time, and I do not want to do this for another hour because the next paragraph is a lot. LJ says, so the machinic drives as non-human sex, the thing that repeats itself without much need from a human anyway. Yeah. I mean, it's, again, the cellular examples that they're giving about how it kind of continues, and then we don't really talk about DNA as reproducing DNA, even though it does, but that's not really how it works. Like, there's a lot of confusion in all this, right? But the whole point for them is that we get to the point of sexuality, and we're in the molar space. And when we talk about the molar sexuality, Freud, thanks to Marx, got fucked in this place of like human sexuality, that we can separate from everything else. And it's like, no. It's the opposite. It's actually that sexuality is in everything. Human sex is not sexuality. Sexuality is the connections of desiring machines, their attraction and repulsion, their investments at large through us giving them voice and affect and more. If that makes sense. And then Rod says, I have lots of quibbles about the nature of the non-human and human sex. That capitalism's not the factory is much clearer. It's closer. It's capitalism's not the factory. The subject is not the maker. The subject's the consumer of it. It's we'll be getting in the language. It's just bear with it, Rod. Yeah, you are not a mind. You're not really even a body. You are a world. You are an entire world. Or an island or whatever. Like there's a million ways he talks about it. You're complicated. And I would say more, but I think at this point, the reason I want to pause is because where you're at and you're supposed to be like, that's fine, because we're about to get into their critique. And because again, you have to understand. So here's the next paragraph. You see this fucking 1, 2, 3. And then it's the end of the whole section. And then we move to psychoanalysis, which is their major critique on that. So this right here is going to be what we go over next week. And it is their point. And it is not short at all. It is not short. It is not easy. And it goes through everything that is in the rest of this section. So I've read shorter books in that paragraph. You have no fucking idea how right you are. You like literally, if they turned this paragraph in a pamphlet as a thing, you were to put like actual references in there and explanations, it would be maybe as long as the book itself. It would end up having to be the size of this entire book. It's a nightmare. It's a nightmare. But we will be getting to it next week. Brett James says, media advertisers in the 1950s used the mantra sex sells. Sort of. So that came from Freud's nephew, by the way, a lot of that. And it was about not necessarily that sex sells. It's about telling people what sex is that sells. And it's a very particular thing he did. There's a famous ad campaign with, I think it was Lucky Strikes. Women were smokers, but they weren't smokers in public. It was considered gauche for a woman to smoke in public in the early 1900s. What a weird world. Think of that, like, women smoke, but please, not here, and not with men. Ugh, that was a real thing. Only 100 years ago. Great world we live in. And so Freud's cousin, nephew, who's a total piece of shit, was like, you know what we could do? And so he staged a protest of women, like flapper girls. Sorry, I need to do that in my... Flapper girls are going to be down at the docks, and they're going to be smoking Lucky cigarettes. Come on down. That's what they did. They had the flapper girls smoking Luckies, and he called a whole bunch of papers, and it was all over headlines. These Lucky Strike cigarettes for the modern woman. Like, they did this shit. And never do that again. I apologize. I apologize, Lace. I had to. It's 1920s, and I don't have a toilet paper tube. I will bring a toilet paper tube so I may do it properly next time. But the setup is this. And so he put out this, and it went everywhere. It was a viral ad before they even knew what the fuck advertising really was. And women started smoking outdoors with Lucky Strikes. Now, what is that about? Well, why did that work? For him and his reasoning is that, as he learned from his uncle, the ability for people to find places that they are frustrated or to sublimate desire, he could give a place for. And it was in frustration around this, and also give placement and attraction to Lucky Strikes as being the thing that liberated women want, which as women's lib was a thing, the suffragette movement was a thing. This could be married to that. And it fucking worked. Totally worked. But D&G's critique would be, well, wait, it's not that just women saw women. It's the complexity of all of the desire machines and the attractions and repulsions for all sorts of things. Now, very different world. But back then, the attraction to attractive women, there were photos of them. They were, I don't know, they were attractive. 1920s is a different time. People were very different. Attractive women smoking Lucky cigarettes. And I smoked Luckies for a year or two, and I do not recommend that shit. And all of that mixed with freedom, rebellion, all of these things, the multitude of connections caused arousal that caused adoption of that. So which I think is a much better understanding. I think cognitive psych backs this shit up these days. Like 50 years ago, Bernays, giant piece of shit, but with Freud, sometimes a cigar is just a cigar. Bernays, sometimes a cigarette is not just a cigarette. And then the George Carlin line about businessmen who smoke cigars. Freud said sometimes a cigar is a cigar. Yeah, well, sometimes it's a big black cock. I miss George. But so it's a different play where we're not talking about a woman seeing another woman and going, I want that, because they have like all of this libidinal energy need to be No, it's the complexity of the person seeing all this other complex semiotics and things to be attached to, and all of the stuff that can be attached and invested, and then the vehicle of the person is that can be pushed forward. That's more or less their argument.
Brooks, Boss suits. You remember in the 80s, there's Boss suits. Boss, the logo,
oh yes,
logo. There is Boss suits.
He's saying boss suits that were very large. The 80s suits were the ugliest fucking thing. Just awful. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, but like businessman, they show like the businessman archetype, right? Where it's kind of like this kind of have fancy phone and like kind of have a hair like a I don't know, the Americans like have this kind of fascination. I don't know, the hair and the kind of like the suit, the very gentle, clean, right, suit, right? It's kind of like that, you know.
Well, that's I think the rest of the Carlin line goes, you know, the best part about smoking cigars, cancer of the mouth. It's a lovely disease. Goes nice with a cell phone and a Mercedes. Fucking, I love it. It's great. All right. With that, I'm going to head out and I'm going to close out because this has been 2:30 that's a lot of AO. Going to be streaming a little bit more this week as well. There's a lot happening in the world that is horrifying. In America, I mean, it's always America. We're great. We're wonderful. And it's going to be a long time. If you like what we do, if you wish to support us, the easiest and best thing for you to do is to join our Discord and join in the conversation, because we like having people to talk to who disagree and who better to inform me when I'm wrong and to implant the right ideas. Discord.gg/DGQC. If you like supporting, always memberships here, pretty good. Super chats, great. Best thing in the world you can do is patreon.com/DGQC. And otherwise, make your way through Anti-Oedipus, because I'll be back next week with the last paragraph of all of this. And it's a bear. This is a bear. This is going to be so long. It's going to be so long. This is going to be the entire fucking 2 hours. It's going to be this one fucking paragraph. But it does have like some of the great lines. To each their own sexes. Fucking, there's some really good shit in here. But it's going to be a lot. So we'll see you then. Otherwise, join and say hi, and we will get through all of this. Be lovely. Let me see on YouTube. Is there anyone streaming that I care to send anyone to? Because there usually isn't. No one else streams except for me at this time. Everyone does evening streams. No. Nothing. Not a lot of philosophy streams to send philosophy people to, sadly. There's some very lovely people streaming, though. So best of luck finding something. Otherwise, enjoy your day.